In a world obsessed with the newest, the shiniest, it's pretty easy to forget about old tech, old cameras. Every year we're bombarded with better specs, with faster autofocus, with more megapixels. But inspiration rarely comes from what's new. Now this is the Fuji GFX50R. It is a 51 megapixel medium format camera from 2018 that I picked up at the beginning of 2024. But despite this being 7 years old, its simplicity, its character, how it feels in the hand, the images that it can produce, and its shutter remind me why I shoot in the first place. Now there's a few things that led me towards picking up this camera, a lot of research, and if you're one of the people that are still trying to get their hands on a Fuji X100VI, this might be an alternate option for you. And this is likely going to become a much more relevant camera this year because there's a lot of rumors out there suggesting there's a new version of this coming, a fixed lens medium format camera, which is basically like an upgraded medium format version of the X100VI, and that will only do good things for this. Unless you're in the market for one, in which case it probably won't because it's just going to crank the value. And full disclosure, Fuji did not send this to me. This is my own camera, my lenses. I sourced everything from Japan. It is not cheap, just so you know. Now last year I wanted to make more of an effort to try other camera brands, Fuji and Nikon included, and I picked up a Fuji X100VI, having had a X100V before. And something about it was just making me always feel like I wanted a little bit more out of that camera. I started looking at what else Fuji had, and the medium format line appealed to me. I think it appeals to everyone once they've been in full frame for a while, they've gone from APS-C. I've never tried out. I wanted to see what it was all about. There's an intrigue level there, I think, for a lot of people. The barrier to entry has always been pretty high because they're not cheap cameras to get a hold of. This is the one that made most sense when I started looking at them. The price was a lot lower to get into the medium format world. This really has a very nice designed body. It looks very much like a bigger version of the X100VI. Big part of Fuji is because it has the film simulations, and this has them, albeit with not some of the newer ones, but we'll talk about in a bit. And importantly, this camera shoots in the elusive 65-24 aspect ratio, aka X-Pan, that super wide cinematic photo aspect ratio. Every still you take looks like a still from a movie. Now with an older camera comes a lot of negative connotations about it's probably not going to survive to today's standards. But the GFX50R is a 51 megapixel medium format sensor. It can capture incredible detail, and electronic shutter wise, you can get 1/16,000th of a second. Now I think when it comes to dynamic range and technology in general, that is very likely going to be true. If you compare this to something like my Sony a7 R5 shooting in RAW, you're very likely going to see some big differences here. The Sony is going to be better with dynamic range, quite substantially. Sony does an excellent job of being able to recover highlights. I'm not saying that the GFX50R can't do that, but there is a big difference. But by this point, you have already seen a lot of images that I've taken, depending on how I edited this video. But it's as good a time as any to tell you that every single one of these images is a JPEG, straight from the camera. No editing done, nothing whatsoever. The images out of this camera have an extremely rich and film-like quality to them. Now, part of that is going to be down to using the film simulations, but a big part of that is to do with the sensor and how it renders the images. And if you do any form of research into this camera, you'll start to see the same comments come from people over and over about that film-like texture out of the sensor in this camera. Shooting JPEG for me is something I suddenly started doing last year. Previously, I was editing photos, but there's something so much more tangible about shooting a JPEG image and being able to just have it there immediately. I don't enjoy the aspects of editing photos. I get it for certain things, for professional work, but when it comes to just taking pictures for yourself, I liked being able to just get the image how it looked in the field and just have that there baked into the JPEG with the film simulations that I like to pick from. Now, if you are wondering about the film simulations that I have been using, these are what they are. This is a kind of custom one called Bright Kodak. And then I also have Kodak Gold, and then a Portra 400 variant as well. So they are film simulations that are in this camera that I have tweaked using an app, which I can't remember the name of right now, but I will put on the screen right here and link below for you. You can go and select the Fuji camera that you use, and it will give you a whole bunch of recipes based upon that sensor. You can go in and change them. Before we go any further, quick thank you to Motion Array for sponsoring today's video. The easiest way to look at Motion Array is that it's a one-stop shop for all the assets that you could possibly need to finish any video that you're making, including videos like this. And one of the newest things they just added is a LUT library that you can simply go on and download LUTs from. You can check out examples of how everything is going to look, and there's a whole bunch of different looks that you can pick from, including things like film simulations and more vintage stylized looks, but also specific LUTs for things like drone and aerial footage, because you're not going to slap a vintage looking LUT on drone footage. It doesn't make sense. And the nice thing with these is because they're just LUTs, they work with all software. So it doesn't matter if you use Adobe Premiere Pro, DaVinci Resolve, Final Cut. Now, these are all included as part of your Motion Array membership, and they're all licensed for you to use as well, which is very important. Now, as well as the LUTs, your Motion Array membership will also get you all the other assets they have, including the AI voiceover creator. You just simply type the voiceover up here, pick a voice, and it can generate a voiceover for you in literally seconds. Now, on top of that voiceover generator, they've just teased something that's coming in 2025. Generative video. Now, instead of me talking about it, I'm just going to show you this little teaser before we get back to the main video. Let's roll this clip.
Your creativity could run wild with generative AI, where you can build alternate realities. Take every crazy idea you've ever had and actually make it real. What if 2025 is better than you could ever expect? Just go to Motion Array and take your videos from good to the best.
Now, despite this being an old camera, it doesn't feel like an old camera to physically use. If we look at it from a turn on standpoint, flip the on switch there, it's pretty fast to turn on. Immediately get into the menus. The menus aren't slow to scroll through or anything like that. To turn off, it's almost instantaneous. It's quick to go into the menus there and change things. Nothing about this is slow. There's no like lag or delay or anything like that. It functions as you would expect it to function, even though it's 7 years old. And this screen as well is actually touchscreen when it comes to sliding through the images there. It's not touchscreen for selecting menus and settings and that kind of thing, but just for swiping through the images. Zooming into images here, it feels super snappy to do this. To go in and out, so you can zoom in, double tap to zoom in, and swipe around with your finger there. It still feels very, very fluid for a camera that is old as it is. I'll show you another example here. New York City, zoom in there. It's fast to go around still, and then look at the detail there as well. You'll have seen some of these images already. Another surprising thing was how fast this can connect to my phone via Bluetooth to transfer images. I did not expect that. I expected that just to be a feature that just would not work, but it works flawlessly and holds up with any of my cameras that are more modern, like the Sony a7R5, to transfer images from that camera to my phone. It's like the same speed. And on top of that, Fuji is still updating this. There's still firmware updates that come out. There's not really any new features as such. You're not getting new film simulations, but in terms of just stability, performance, tweaks and improvements, they're still updating it 7 years later. So lens-wise, what I've actually been shooting with is this. Let's get this off here. This is a 45mm Hasselblad f4. Why, you ask? Well, because this is one of the original X-Pan lenses that were actually on like the film X-Pan cameras, the TX1. This is one of those lenses. This is a 45mm. And you can get this Kip-on X-Pan to GFX adapter, which allows you to mount the X-Pan lenses. This lens is absolutely stunning. I am a huge fan of this lens. Just the size, the detail that it can capture, the character of the image. It is a beautiful lens, albeit not cheap for a lens in 2025 that is manual. I think I paid like $1,100 US for this. I could be wrong. eBay again. Also from Japan. Now, a lot of people tend to use a filter with this style of thing, and I've been using this 49mm Tiffin Black Satin 3. It's kind of like a Black Pro Mist, but less intense. It blooms the highlights a little, but it's a lot more subtle. It just reduces sharpness a little bit more, and I do feel like that adds to the filmic look that I've been getting out of this, combined with the sensor and the film simulations as well. So if you want to pick up one of these, I'll put a link below for you. Black Satin 3 specifically, because there is different ones. This lens has such a tactile feel to it. Listen to the aperture, the iris adjustment. Right on the front there, still so clicky despite how old this is. The manual focus ring is just dampened so nicely. And I also picked up used from B&H. There you go, if you don't believe me. I don't know why you wouldn't believe me, but this is the GF50 f3.5, because a lot of the GFX lenses are a lot larger. And you'll see on here, this is like the smallest setup you could possibly get with autofocus, which we'll get to in a bit. So if you're looking for more of an everyday carry, this is the smallest that you could possibly make it when you compare it to A7R5 there, or like a Q343. It's a little bit bigger. Shooting manual focus, which this X-Pan lens obviously is, really engages you with shooting, but there are times when I have kind of wanted to have autofocus with the GFX 50R here, and that's why I picked up that lens. But one of the big appeals for people for the GFX 50R is going to be its design. It has a timeless design that Fuji doesn't really kind of make anymore outside of the X100-6 in like a bigger style body. All of their GFX cameras now look a lot more modern, whereas this has a rangefinder aesthetic kind of ergonomic design to it. One of the other big appeals is build quality. It feels like a tank in your hand. Now, not a lot of cameras anymore are made in Japan, which was seen as a place where things are made and finished a little bit better. This is actually made in Japan. It is big, it is huge in the hands, but I do love the size of it. And you can get all kinds of grips for it, but I do like the grip on this. The grip kind of sticks out right here. You can't really tell with a shadow, but there you go. And then there's almost like a little thumb part here. And for me, it just sits perfectly in my hands. I know Kofi has done a video on this recently as well. He's got much bigger hands, and he has the smaller grip on there, and he says that fits very nicely in his hands as well. But if you've got smaller hands, this probably isn't going to be the camera for you. With that being said, as a medium format camera, it is on the smaller side compared to a lot of the other options out there. So if the intrigue of medium format is something you want to get into, but you don't want to go with a bigger size, this is a great option for you as well. For me, it's not too big that it gets in the way. I've been walking around a bunch of different places this year with 2 different cameras hanging from my neck. It never felt like it was too heavy or too big or was too bulky. It always just felt okay. I have no complaints about the size of it. When you talk about it as an everyday carry camera, it is a little bit on the bigger side, especially to what my current everyday carry is now, the Q343. But it is what it is. Not a lot of people talk enough about the shutter sound of a camera and how much that makes you just appreciate that photo. This is arguably one of the nicest shutters that I've ever heard on a camera. Listen to it through the Shure SM7B here. That little delay sound after the shot's been taken, it's so nice. Let's take the lens off. Listen. Now, the EVF isn't the biggest compared to some of the other options that are out right now, and this is one of the areas where it does suffer a little bit. It's a 0.77 magnification, so it's not small by any means, but what doesn't feel old about it is the clarity. It's a 3.69 million dot EVF, which is better than some of the cameras that still come out now today. If you go in the higher end world of things, like the real like pro bodies, then you're getting 9 million dots, but a lot of the more entry level cameras don't have EVFs that high res. You've got all the tactile Fuji dials on there. Everything is properly engraved and painted within the engraving there. The dials have this beautiful texture to them as well, which feels very tactile, albeit kind of rough in your hands if your hands are really dry, but you know that you're turning the dial when you're turning it. That's a weird thing to talk about, but it just feels really tactile when you're using it. Just listen to the clickiness. You've got a lock on there as well. Let's talk about the screen, because the screen on the back of this does not make sense for a camera that came out in 2018. You have a true photographer's screen, and what I mean by that is just a screen that angles up and down, nothing out to the side that gets in the way when you're doing lower angle stuff. The thing with this screen is it's a 3.2 inch, 2.3 million dot screen from a camera from 2018, which makes no sense. There is cameras that still come out today that are like a measly 1.5 million dot screen. The screen on that was way ahead of its time, and Honestly, still is, 7 years later. And that adds to the experience of when you're shooting with an image and you're looking back at it and you're zooming in and you're able to see that detail and your image just kind of pops on the back of the screen immediately for you. You do have 2 card slots, both are SD. Another good thing to point out with this is because it's older, you typically think, oh, the battery life isn't going to be the best, but Fuji used a bigger style of battery for this camera, and you can get about 400 shots out of a new battery. Now, finding a new battery from Fuji is going to be near on impossible. You're going to have to go with a third-party option, and there's not a lot of them left. But 400 shots, because it's medium format, you're shooting slower in general. This isn't a spray and pray camera. 400 shots is going to be more than enough for a day of shooting. And of course, you have the X-Pan aspect ratio and the strange 7:6 aspect ratio as well, which is unique to, I guess, medium format cameras, but that's a really interesting way to shoot as well. I find anytime you shoot in a different aspect ratio, it completely changes the way that you compose images. And it's one of those things that you should try switching up now and then. Don't just shoot 16:9 all the time, because it makes you just view the world in one way. If you change to a 1:1 or a 6:7 or 65:24, it completely unlocks a new way of shooting. So it's not all good. There are going to be some aspects that this camera suffers from. Rightly so, because it's a camera from 2018. Technology gaps. And what I mean by this is the latest autofocus speeds compared to like a Sony camera, like eye tracking, AI detection, figuring out when you walk behind trees and where the subject still is, even though it can't focus on them. You don't have any of that. It does not exist. It's just a very straightforward autofocus system with face detection that does work. Autofocus speed is not going to be what you're used to with any of the modern cameras, but if you shoot a lot of manual stuff, if you shoot like I shoot landscape and more docu-style of events when you're shooting with other people, just kind of capturing what was happening, everyone else shooting, then you might not need that. It's not going to be a camera that you're using to shoot sports or wildlife or anything like that. It is very much a camera that slows you down. And if you enjoy shooting like that, you will enjoy shooting with this camera. You don't get the latest and greatest film simulations. If Fuji is bringing out any new ones, you're not getting that on this camera. They are reserving those for the latest cameras that come out. I think there's a new one called Real Ace. Never personally tried it. Don't know what it looks like, how it feels to shoot with, but just know that you're not getting the latest film simulations with the GFX 50R. You can still go in and customize the current film simulations, which I've been doing and talked about already, but you're not getting the new ones. The batteries earlier that we talked about, I do have one of the original Fuji ones that came with this camera when I bought it, but I also have 2 third-party ones. The issue with charging these batteries is, or I guess one of the things we're blessed with now, is all cameras, like my R5 here, my Leica Q343, they all have USB-C ports on the side and they all charge via USB-C. This camera does not charge via USB-C, meaning you have to take the battery out and physically charge it in a plug-in to the wall charger. Blow the dust off this, literally, because it's that old. More dog hair than anything else, but this is the charger that you have to use, or something similar. It's a BCT125, is that? Yeah, BCT125. It's a plug-in charger, and this adds size to when you're traveling. It's a fairly big charger. And then the other thing is the lens sizes. GFX lenses in general are a lot bigger. As I said, this is the smallest one right here. This is the 53.5. Well, they're also expensive. Now, earlier we touched on how there's rumors of a newer version of this, but more of like a medium format X100VI coming this year in 2025. People are calling it the GFX 100RF, and it's allegedly a fixed lens medium format X100VI. Couple of interesting features so far, but again, they could be rumors. There's going to be a crop zoom lever under the shutter button and a dedicated aspect ratio dial. So it's right up my alley. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. What happens when cameras like that come out? People look at it and they go, I can't really afford that. But what else is there out there? This is going to be that. But price perspective, experience-wise of using this camera, this is very much a camera that is a fantastic price for what it is, what it can offer, what it can shoot in 2025 when you compare it to some of the other options that are out there. I think we've proven that, yes, it's a 7-year-old camera, but it doesn't perform in all ways like a 7-year-old camera. This is proof that technology doesn't always inspire you to shoot, and we shouldn't disregard old cameras that do inspire us to shoot. I think we'll end on that. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.